Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome to yet another Warhammer lore video in which we are going to be taking a look at Gotrek Gurnisson and Felix Jaeger. Now, this is probably the most bastardly little request you little monkeys have made of me so far, as you're essentially asking me to do a lore video for a series of books, which I'm kind of recommending you actually go read, because they're kind of good. So how the hell to do this without it being chock full of goddamn spoilers? Well, I'll do my best to try and not spoil too much. So some spoilers are going to be rather inevitable, nothing, story related, but a lot of the information about the characters are only revealed partially throughout the book, so some minor spoilers will be unavoidable despite my best efforts. So I figured we'd start out relatively spoiler safe by just going over a little bit about the series itself. So it's currently sitting at about 14 books, with the first 7 being written by William King, and then handing over the pen to Nathan Long, continuing the series by writing books 11 to 12. And after then, the series has been open to multiple authors, contributing with short stories and even entire novels. So the series starts out with the book called TROLLSLAYER, then continues on with SHAMANSLAYER, DAEMONSLAYER, DRAGONSLAYER, BEASTSLAYER, VAMPIRESLAYER, Gotrek and Felix the first omnibus, the second omnibus, GIANTSLAYER, ORCSLAYER, MANSLAYER, ELFSLAYER, SHAMANSLAYER, ZOMBIESLAYER. I'm thinking you might be able to see some kind of theme in these titles, and they usually also give a pretty good hint of generally what they're going to be trying to be chopping into small pieces. Now, something that has been a little bit confusing for a few people is the fact that there are in many cases first and second edition covers. Now, first edition of TROLLSLAYER is essentially exactly the same as second edition of TROLLSLAYER. It's a different cover. I do believe it has a different foreword, but other than that, it's exactly the same book. So if you see a novel that's called TROLLSLAYER first edition, don't worry, it's exactly the same as the TROLLSLAYER second edition. It is the first book in the series, but at this point, the books are mostly available in ebook format. There are some of them that are available individually, but in most cases I just say pick up the omnibus. I believe there are 3 of them now. The first, second, and third omnibuses, and I would consider them pretty goddamn good value for money. 3 books a pop? Yeah, definitely. They're not bad books by any stretch of the imagination. Like, if you like good old-fashioned sword and sorcery stuff with 2 kick-ass heroes and a little bit of humour, Gotrek Gurnisson being a rather funny little bastard on occasion, I would definitively suggest you take a look at these books, and if you do, I'd also strongly suggest just turning off the bloody video right now, because now we are going to be venturing into territory that is going to be requiring, as I have warned several times, so if you're still listening at this point, well, you've got yourself to blame. It's going to be involving some spoilers, as I tried to make a completely spoiler-free version of this, and it essentially became a bare-boned version with me sitting there umming and humming for about 5 minutes before going like, and that's about all I can tell you without actually spoiling shit, so yeah. You have been duly warned multiple times. So, moving on. Out of the 2, I think we should actually start out with Felix himself, Gotrek's trusty pet. Chronicler. Yes, that's the word. Felix Jaeger, the youngest son of the Jaeger merchant family, a quite wealthy merchant family at that, attended a prestigious university in Altdorf and had a promising career until, foolhardily, he challenged another student to a duel and accidentally killed the poor sod, which, well, let's just say that Imperial authorities have a somewhat dim view on duels. In most cases, they can ignore the matter because it's mostly a thing between highborn sons, but unfortunately, the guy that Felix ended up killing was the son of a nobleman, and, well, let's just say that Daddy had a hell of a lot more pull with the local police forces than Felix has. Of course, realizing what was about to happen, Felix hightailed it out of there and fell in with a bunch of somewhat rowdy individual and instigated the famous Windows tax riots. Now, what was the window tax riot? Well, the books are a little bit vague on the point, and there have been a few different interpretations on it. The one that appears to be more or less supported by the books is that there was essentially a tax introduced in the Empire upon Windows, because, you know, the Emperor needed money for his campaign, so they had to find some way to squeeze money out of the peasantry, and so they went around the houses and went like, well, you have 4 windows, so you have to pay this much in window tax. It might sound ridiculous, but living in Norway, the land of retarded taxes, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something like this at some bloody point in the future. So, Felix Jaeger and a bunch of other people were less than pleased about this particular tax and decided that they would make their displeasure known. The problem was that, well, the Emperor was not in a discussing mood at this point and sent in the bloody Reichsguard to stop the mostly unarmed rioters. You can imagine the results of that were rather horrifying, really. And here's the thing. You see, Felix, being a brave little idiot, decided that, you know, I can probably stop the charge of the goddamn Reichsguard by stepping in front of their horses, you know. Surely they must stop, right? They wouldn't just trample him into the dirt and let their war horses shit on the remains. Of course not. But this was not to be the end of our naive little hero, because a small orange dolt jumped into the middle of the Reichsguard, butchering half a dozen of them in as many seconds. This little orange flash turned out to be the dwarf slayer Gotrek Gurnisson. And after having, well, saved Felix Jaeger from a rather ignoble death as a, I don't know, foot warmer for the various Reichsguard heavy horse, they went off to a tavern, as people usually do after having been almost trampled by horses. You know, it's a thing. Where Felix Jaeger pledged, rather drunkenly, to follow and, what's the word? Oh yes, chronicle Gotrek Gurnisson's exploits as he is trying to find a worthy death. A promise dear old Felix has, on occasion, had some minor reasons to regret, you know. They've run into some small problems, chasing Gotrek's doom, nothing major, nothing involving, you know, bloodthirsters or trolls or hordes of skavens or orcs or, you know, stuff like that. Mostly harmless stuff. Yes, mostly harmless stuff. Definitely nothing involving a giant fire-breathing dragon. Absolutely no. So, how was he going to chronicle this? Well, essentially he decided, well, I'm a poet, a really bad one, but doy. So let's just write a book about it, and so he did. He started writing a book, or several books in fact, titled My Travels with Gotrek. And occasionally he sent these little manifestos back home to his brother in Altdorf, on the more or less accepted deal that his brother would just, you know, keep him for him, and if Felix ever ended up on his doorstep wrapped in his, well, considering the shit they're fighting, I'd probably say that he'd be lucky to arrive in more than 2 pieces. Probably, yeah. In other words, on all due likelihood, the only real indication that his brother would have of the end of Felix's quest is a wet bag of loosely identifiable remains being dumped on his doorsteps in some far distant future. Nevertheless, he figured that, you know, if I can just keep sending these out piecemeal, then at his death, or by some miraculous chance that he actually managed to survive Gotrek Gurnisson's death, then, you know, he could actually publish a proper book of it. His brother, however, being a merchant, had a better idea. He decided to publish the books you know, a little by little, and start selling them as fantasy novels. You know, because anyone who read this went like, he did what now? The dwarf just killed a what? Ha! It's utterly ludicrous. And Felix Jaeger survived this? Ha! As bloody if, and they became a major hit. But Felix was blissfully unaware of this and just continued on with his little adventures. And while on several occasions he has considered ditching the little dwarf and making a run for it, well, in all due likelihood, Gotrek would take offense at this and more than likely hunt him down and do horrible things to his anus, but additionally, he's also kind of, you know, grown a spine. He's come to admire the dwarves for their sense of honor, if not their personalities and sterling conversation skills. But he doesn't really want to break the oath, even though it has led him into one or maybe two ever so slightly life-threatening situations. You know, he's gonna tough it out. And during one of these periods of toughening out a slightly threatening situation, he came across the magical sword, Karagul, a magical blade of exquisite workmanship with a dragon-shaped hilt. Now, this sword was originally a relic of the Order of the Fiery Heart Templars, a more vapid-sounding name you will not come across anytime soon, and was forged specifically to slay dragons or anything dragon-related. And, well, this is all well and good, but how does a, you know, slightly shiny toothpick have any real hope of killing a giant-ass dragon? Ah, funny you should ask. You see, a Karagul has a bit of a mind of its own and has on a few occasions actually taken over Felix's thought process and essentially turned him into a bit of a batshit insane berserker that is just, you know, the sword eventually just goes, well, I can't kill it on my own, but this quivering human is pretty damn worthless at the task, so let's just use him as a delivery vehicle and throw him at the dragon. Hopefully, at some point during, you know, perhaps getting roasted alive or gutted by gigantic claws, I might get close enough to do some sort of minor damage to the giant-ass dragon. You know, I mean, what have you got to lose? I mean, you're relatively fireproof. The human, well, who gives a shit? This has led Felix on a few occasions to consider throwing away the sword, as it has made a few occasions a little bit more threatening. You can't really deny that, but on the other hand, it's also a really, really good sword that seems to keep itself sharp by magical means, and it has never dented or broken in any way, shape, or form, which is pretty goddamn handy considering that this thing is literally your one and only goddamn lifeline when you are surrounded by all manners of nasties that, while being somewhat distracted by the little orange furball brutally murdering their brethren, occasionally find the time to try and part their old Felix head from his shoulders. Felix Jaeger's primary reason for still being alive, however, is the Orange Terror, his little companion, or master, depending on who you ask, Gotrek Gurnisson. Now, we don't know much about Gotrek, and what little we do know I will endeavour to not tell you, for obvious reasons. What we do know, which is relatively easily available, is that his former life he was an engineer. However, some great crime or terrible deed was committed in his younger years by dwarven standards at the very least, which led him to take the Slayer Oath. Now, the Slayer Oath is something that I'm going to quickly explain because I have touched upon this previously, but it is a little bit more complicated than Dwarf simply just wants to get himself killed in battle. You see, the Slayer Oath says that the Slayer is to go out and find a worthy death. Now, a worthy death in this point essentially just means go get your ass killed. Except you're not allowed to just get your ass killed. You have to do it while making an effort, while making a difference. For example, an example I used in the Dwarf lore video, in fact, if a Dwarf Slayer spots a massive greenskin army that is making its way towards the Dwarf Hold, option A would be for him to charge the massive orc horde, giggling like a schoolgirl and getting himself killed, thereby, you know, freeing himself of his oath. However, he isn't allowed to do that, because if he does that, well, first and foremost, he's betraying his fellow dwarfs by not warning them. Secondly, he could kill far more greenskins by returning to the dwarf hold and warning them, and then staying in the dwarf hold and fighting from the ramparts and trying to keep them at bay. But of course, if he actually, by doing this, manages to have the orc horde defeated, then he's still alive and he's failed his quest, and so he has to go on and find himself another way to get himself killed. A dwarf is simply just incapable of not giving it his all. Even if he's fighting some giant orc war boss and he figures like, okay, if I just move a little slower, that blow will hit me and it'll kill me and I'll be happy. But he can't do it. He has to fight to his full potential all the time. He can never just let himself get killed. This has led Gotrek Gurnisson to be perhaps, well, it's arguable really. If you ask some people, they will tell you that he is the most successful dwarf slayer of all times. And if you ask other people, he is by far the least successful dwarf slayer of all times, as he has fought pretty much anything and everything you would think capable of killing him, and yet he's still alive. In fact, he has been adventuring, bumping around the Warhammer world, upholding his slayer oath for 80 bloody years. 80 years of trying to get himself killed, and failing miserably. And if you read the books, well, it's almost cruel occasionally. You can almost think that, oh well, the author has kept him alive again. They should really have finished the little bastard, but nope, he's fine. And why is he fine? Well, that's a bit of a question. Now, of course, the honest answer is that he's got plot armor so thick you could hurl a planet at him and he'd still find some way of waltzing out of the way. However, the lore reason is his axe. Now, this magical axe, we don't actually know that much about it because, well, you know, it's magical, and I don't want to be ruining too much of it, but it is definitely a runing-crafted weapon. Which he gained in one of his expeditions in the Northern Wastes. It would appear that the weapon belonged to the High King Thangrim Firebeard's son. And seeing as it belonged to the son of one of the kings of one of the dwarf holds way, way, way up in the north, this has to mean that it is a weapon from the ancestral age, a very, very old and therefore exceedingly powerful weapon. There are a few hints dropped throughout the books, which I'll try not to spoil, that essentially say that this is a ludicrously powerful weapon, and it is actually doing far more than just, you know, cutting things. It's not just the fact that the weapon is nigh on indestructible, or the fact that it never requires sharpening, or the fact that it's capable of killing, you know, greater demons and dragons and all manners of horrifying monsters, or even just the fact that it is making Gotrek way, way stronger and tougher than even a dwarf has any real right to be. It also appears as if the weapon is keeping Gotrek and Felix young. They're keeping them strong and vital and energetic. This is, okay. I'm going to have to mention these characters a little bit later anyway, so I guess we can... I've already warned you about spoilers, so yeah, okay. They do run into a character whose name is Max Schreiber, and he's a wizard. They run into him again later. Many, many, many years later, like 20 years later. And Max Schreiber has become, you know, a middle-aged man. He's in his early 40s, you know, he's getting grey hair. You know, the wares of times and living in a very much so feudal technology-level society is wearing on him. And yet, Felix, who's supposed to be his own age, seems to be just as young and energetic as ever, which, you know, that has to raise a few eyebrows, and considering he has by no means been living a healthy and safe lifestyle, eating his veggies every day, he really just flat out should not be as healthy as he is. And it would appear that the axe is almost keeping them alive for some greater purpose that has yet to be discerned, and before anyone mentions it, fuck the end times. So, I did say I'm gonna have to mention some of these characters because it's a bit part of the, entire backstory, because, they adventure in a bit of a group. And although the group is not always together, they do adventure, like I said, as a group for quite a few of the books, so I feel that Max Schreiber and Ulrika has a bit of a role to play here. I'll only be mentioning these characters, though. There are a host of other side characters, of course, and in fact some of them have turned out to be even more important than these characters, but these are the characters they have spent the most time with, so to say, so I'm just going to mention these, and I'm going to keep a certain Slayer, that a few of you might know who is, a secret, because he is a kick-ass character, and I want you to read the bloody book, damn it. So, Ulrika is the son of a Kislevit son. Yes, she is the son of a Kislevit boyar. No, of course not. She is the daughter of a Kislevit boyar. If she actually was the son, that would make the whole romance a lot creepier. Actually, that's insulting. Never mind. That little blop there is so retarded that I'm actually just going to keep that in rather than editing it out like I normally would. So, Ulrika, the daughter of a Kislevit boyar, which is essentially is a rank of nobility. He is a lord in Kislev. She is a fantastic fighter. She's one of those really strong female characters, and I really did like her for that. Of course, this being a fantasy setting, she had to eventually fall in love with our rugged hero, and thank God it was Felix and not Gotrek, because again, ugh. Anyways, the whole romance is not the strong suit of the series, let's just say. William King is a wonderful author in many respects, but writing engaging romances, I wouldn't say that was one of them. Max Schreiber, on the other hand, is actually a fairly interesting character. He is an Imperial wizard. Now, he dabbles in a bit of different laws, but he's essentially a wizard of the lore of metal for the most part, although he occasionally pulls some more creative stuff out of his, rather luxurious robes. He had a bit of a lover's quarrel with Felix, both of them competing for Ulrika's attention, and like I said, again, the romance is most definitively not the strong suit of this particular series, but Max Schreiber evolved into far more of an interesting character in many ways than I originally gave him credit for, and, he is one of those characters that you actually kind of feel a bit of empathy for. He's surrounded by these apparently otherworldly creatures. I mean, Gotrek is just not a normal dwarf at this point, and Felix Jaeger is apparently being kept young by some kind of sorcery. Max Schreiber is just a mage and is kind of confused, like, what the hell is even going on at this point? And his struggle with this whole situation is actually, in my opinion, one of the more interesting parts of the later books. But I'm going to try and leave it at that because now I'm getting really, really close into hardcore spoiler territory, so what else can I say about the Gotrek and Felix series? Well, I can say, again, go read the bloody books. They're wonderful books. There's a ton of good old-fashioned sword and sorcery adventure in there. And I am halfway tempted to make a full-on hardcore spoiler lore video, but I might do that at some point in the future. However, for the moment, I am going to limit myself to what I've made here. It's a pretty damn short video, by my standards anyways. The full-on spoiler video would be considerably longer, and I did in fact make a full-on spoiler video, but No. I think I am going to make one, eventually, but do not hold your breath. I'm going to wait a long time before I make that video. Sooner or later, however, it's probably gonna pop up, but again, read the books, please, I beseech you. Ebook variants should be pretty damn cheap at this point in time, and, there are always less wholesome way of obtaining 1 or 2 copies of the writing, should you just wish to, you know, see if you like it. Not that I'm suggesting anything. Mind you, that would be completely beyond my station. Wink wink. Until then, I have been Arch. Thank you very much for listening, and although this has been a bit sketchy, and I'm still not happy with it, but this is my 7th take, and I'm never going to be happy with this video, so I'm just gonna throw it out there and hope that you find some enjoyment in it. Until next time, have a good day, and hope it was at least somewhat useful.